Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Rulemaking Advisory Committee for Public Use Restrictions of the Sandy River Delta. Today is October 2nd, 2023, and we're going to go ahead and start our meeting this morning.
Thanks, Danielle. Let's begin with introductions, if people don't mind. I'll start with myself. I'm Blake Helm. I'm a proprietary specialist with the Department of State Lands. I handle policy or planning and policy for the Department's Waterway Use Authorization Program. Danielle, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, and apologies, I'm trying to advance the slides, so I'm gonna have to exit out of it. It's not wanting to advance. But before I do that, my name is Danielle Boudreau. I'm the rulemaking coordinator with the Department of State Lands, and I'll be helping to facilitate this meeting this morning.
Thank you, Danielle. Chris, do you mind?
Absolutely not, Blake. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Castelli with the Department of State Lands. I've done quite a few things here at the department. Currently, I'm acting Deputy Director of Operations. While our friend and peer Bill Ryan is over at Agriculture, and when he comes back, I will be our Legislative and Government Affairs Coordinator. Thank you.
Dave, ODF&W, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi there, everyone. I'm Dave Kiter. I'm the district biologist for the North Willamette Watershed District, so east of the Willamette River out to the Cascade Mountains.
Thank you, Dave. Ray?
Ray Young, City Manager for the City of Troutdale.
Thanks, Ray. Jeff?
Hi, Jeff Shue, Friends of the Sandy River Delta.
All right, Barb? I'm not sure if you could hear me, Barb. And I'm just going off of the names that are on Zoom, so if you would like to be called something else, please let me know. But Barb, can you introduce yourself? All right, we'll get back to Barb. Jared?
Morning, Jared Friend. I'm the Director of Helicopter Operations at Hillsborough Heli Academy, just on the opposite side of the Sandy River.
And then last, I believe, is Stephen.
Hey, good morning, folks. I'm Stephen Elgart. I'm the Recreation Staff Officer for the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, representing the Forest Service. Good morning.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that. And one last time, Barb, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I just got unmuted. Thank you so much. I'm with Oregon Equestrian Trails, volunteering at the Sandy River Delta since 1996. And I'm also with Friends of the Sandy River Delta.
Great, much appreciated, folks, for all the introductions and taking that time so that we can have that for the record. And I believe that goes to you, Danielle. You're gonna walk through the agenda for us.
Yes, I am. Sorry about the technical difficulties with the slideshow, but we're fixed now. So this morning, I'm going to be going over, after, we talk about our Zoom protocols and how we, going to run the meeting. I'm going to go over the rulemaking process in general, the operating principles and the role of the RAC. Then I'll hand it over to Blake, who's going to be going over our rulemaking purpose and scope. He's going to lead discussion for the draft rule and the draft notice of proposed rulemaking. And then if we have any interested parties on the line, which I believe we do, we'll open up for comment from interested parties. And then after that, we'll just do a summary of the meeting and talk about next steps for the rulemaking. Okay. So for meeting participation, just to help things run smoothly, that each person who wishes to speak raise their hand. And we are all on Zoom, and to raise your hand in Zoom, you'll click at the reactions button near the bottom of your screen and click raise hand. Or if you're joining us by phone and not by the computer, you press *9. And if you need any technical support, go ahead and put that in the chat. And we ask that you keep your mic muted unless it's your turn to speak. That way we don't have a bunch of people speaking over each other, and we know, just kind of keep it a little bit easier. And we'll call on members in the order in which they raise their hand, and we ask that all participants be respectful of each other and DSL representatives. And so on to our rulemaking process. Are there any questions about Zoom protocols and how to participate? Okay. So for our rulemaking process, we establish the need for rulemaking, and the proposed rule language is drafted. And the department then convenes a rulemaking advisory committee. So that's the step we're at now. And then once we have our rulemaking advisory committee concludes and we get consensus on the draft rule and the other proponents of the notice of proposed rulemaking, that's published by the Secretary of State in the Oregon Bulletin. And then once the notice is published, we have a public comment period that's open for 30 days following that publication. We have a public rule hearing, which is held approximately 15 days after the publication. And then once we've gone through our public comment period, the proposed rule language is presented to either the State Land Board or the department's executive director for final approval. And in the case of this rulemaking, it will go to the State Land Board. And then we file the approved rule language with the Secretary of State. Yes, we have a question from Jeff.
There we go. Hi, on the small screen, I had to find out how to get back to the unmute button. Yeah, is this presentation going to be mailed out so we can refer to it?
Yes. All of the materials following this meeting will be mailed out and posted to our proposed rulemaking website.
Okay.
And the recording of this video will also be published to the department's YouTube channel, which we'll send out the link for as well.
Great. And you'll share the links to this
Yes.
group? Thank you.
Yes, we'll send everything out to the RAC members afterwards. Thank you for your question. So our operating principles, which I did send out a longer version of this to the RAC members, so I'm going to just touch on the highlights for that. The duties and responsibilities of the RAC members are to advise the department on the proposed rule language. The group is an advisory board, and their role is to provide advice and frame policy choices. We ask that they attend and participate in the meeting, and to study available information and providing input, and to consider a range of issues and options so that we can address those, discuss the pros and cons, and seek to develop any recommendations. The department's role is to provide technical and administrative support, information, institutional knowledge, and expertise, and provide advice to the RAC. We're responsible for scheduling any meetings, preparing meeting summaries, and maintaining a public record of the RAC process. So for the facilitator role, it's the responsibility of the facilitator to ensure a safe, welcoming environment where all members can participate, conduct the meeting to foster collaborative decision-making and consensus building, distribute the meeting summaries where that outlines the topics that were discussed, any areas where there was agreement, and any remaining issues on which agreement was not reached. The facilitator will not act as an advocate on behalf of any issue, interest group, or member. While the facilitator may make recommendations regarding the process, they will not make any substantive decisions. And the facilitator will provide coordination between any meetings that we have and serving as the primary communicator between RAC members and between the RAC and the department. So our operating procedures. I mentioned earlier that we look for consensus decision-making. And so we'll use a consensus model to facilitate the decision-making and ensure the RAC benefits from the individual views, experiences, background, training, and expertise of the members. Consensus is a participatory process where the RAC members strive for recommendations that they can either accept, support, live with, or agree not to oppose. So continuing with our operating procedures, this is a long slide with a lot of small text. So I'll be reading it, and again, we'll be sending this out. The expectations for the decision-making process include that members agree on the value of consensus. The group should strive to achieve it. As such, recommendations will be made by consensus of all present members. So if there's something that we're not agreed on, we ask that members provide recommended language. And so members agree to compromise and work together to find workable solutions in the commitment to achieving consensus. Those with differing recommendations are responsible for proposing alternative solutions or approaches to resolve differences. The meeting will be conducted in a way that fosters collaborative decision-making and consensus building. Members will honor decisions made and avoid reopening issues once resolved. When consensus cannot be reached, the facilitator may invite documentation of differing opinions or viewpoints. So again, RAC meetings are considered public meetings and are open to the public. So we do have some interested parties on the line. RAC members should be advised that all rulemaking records, including formal documents, rule drafts, meeting summaries and exhibits, meeting recordings and communications, are public records and may be released in response to a public records request. Communications refer to all statements and votes made during meetings, memoranda, work projects, emails, and correspondence, and documents or materials developed to fulfill the goals of rulemaking. And just to reiterate, I do post all of our meeting materials online. I link to our meeting gets posted to the department's YouTube channel and gets linked. So we just try to be as transparent as possible and provide all our materials to the public. So interested parties, you've heard me mention this a couple of times. Interested parties are non-voting meeting attendees. They're invited to observe, but not permitted to participate during RAC member discussions. They're able to provide a timed comment as time allows after RAC members have concluded business. And at a later date, after the RAC process has concluded, DSL will invite public comments on the proposed rule and will hold a public hearing prior to consideration and adoption. And just as a reminder, if you are not a member of the RAC, please hold any comments or questions until the end, and we'll go ahead and address those at that time. Okay. And now I'll turn it over to Blake. And Blake, just let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
It looks like Chris may have a question.
Oh. Yes, thank you, Blake. Actually, Danielle and Blake, I just noted we had a few members join while you were going over.
Oh, okay.
Sort of the protocol. So I didn't know if we could let those folks introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. You were reading my mind. So I was going to take just a moment. It looks like we did have a couple of people. So Morgan, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Morgan Dowie with the Department of State Lands. I am the Proprietary and Removal Fill Compliance Coordinator.
Great. And Stephanie?
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Rawson. I'm Metro's Community Stewardship Manager.
And it looks like Captain Doug, I'm sorry.
Asbo.
Asbo. Okay. I was like, that looks like Asbo, but I don't know. So go ahead. Sorry.
Good morning. I'm in between meetings, but my name is Captain Doug Asbo. I am the Patrol Operations and Hope Team Captain for the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office.
Great. Much appreciated. And I think that gets all of the RAC members. Unless I am missing something, let me know. Got it. All right. So purpose and scope of this rulemaking.
We have another question. Sorry.
Oh, I did not see that. Excuse me, Jeff, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, it's me again. Interested party versus members. Are we all considered members in this meeting?
Yes, those who introduce themselves.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying, Jeff. All right, so rulemaking purpose and scope. Some of you may or may not be aware, but DSL has received an increase in public safety reporting, namely for vehicle use and the discharge of firearms, specifically in the Sandy River Delta area. The use restrictions that we're proposing are meant to protect the public health and safety as well as the surrounding environment. The intent is not to exclude people from using the property in the natural area, but rather to restrict those use so that all members of the public can continue to enjoy the Sandy River Delta. The rulemaking process is an opportunity for the department to get direct feedback from those that are affected by the rules. Just a note, it would be helpful to look at these rules, at the proposed text rather, through the lens of how is this going to affect my day-to-day operations as the city manager, as a public official of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, as a member of the public, as a user of the Sandy River Delta. And so the comments and feedback that we receive from the RAC will be factored into the proposed rule language. That's the point of the RAC, as Danielle went over. We are looking for advice, and we're not assuming that we got the rulemaking right the first time. So we're hoping that anything that perhaps we failed to address in the proposed text will come out in this comment period and in the future public comment period and public hearing. So after all that relevant input has been considered, we'll make a final recommendation on the restrictions and the rulemaking language to the State Land Board at the February 2024 meeting, which is the second Tuesday in February. So I'm not certain the exact date, but we can find that. Danielle, can you hit the next slide? I'll just give a moment if anybody has any questions about the purpose. All right, seeing no hands, I will move on. So just to get into a little bit more of the details for the need for this rule, I mentioned, vehicle use and firearm discharge in the area. Particularly we're concerned about the firearm discharge because people use the natural area. There's a lot of thick brush. Visibility is not always great. And so this use in the Sandy River Delta puts other users at risk, and we just don't want the possibility of somebody being seriously injured on public property when there's an opportunity for us to address it. In addition, the Troutdale Airport is right there. It's directly across, so negligent discharges of the firearm can pose a danger to airplanes flying over. So an aviation accident would not be a positive outcome here. So those are reasons why we're looking to address the firearm discharge. Vehicle use in particular on the natural area can create safety and health risks. Number one, it can pose a fire risk to the natural area. There are no maintained roads. They're not intended for vehicles, they're intended for pedestrians. So brush can be high. You've got a hot vehicle that parks over brush. That dry brush will eventually ignite, and so we can see wildfire. I know when I worked for the Army Corps, when we were, surveying our BPA corridors and we brought our vehicles out in those areas, we brought water with us so that we can wet the ground around to ensure that, the hot exhaust and engine doesn't ignite the dry brush. In addition, the vehicle use poses an additional risk to pedestrians when you have multiple modes of transportation sharing a roadway or other throughway, it increases the risk of injury. Pedestrians and car traffic don't go the same speed, as we can all know, and that poses a risk as cars go down, even if they're going 5 miles per hour. That's 10 miles per hour, that can cause significant injury if a pedestrian is struck. Additionally, vehicles aren't often properly maintained, may leak fuel, oil, other toxic liquids, and introduce exhaust into the surrounding environment. The vehicles over the natural areas will damage vegetation. That create rutted trails. They'll eventually, increase runoff and soil erosion because of soil compaction, or because of compacting the soil. When soil is compacted, the topsoil is very easily eroded, and that eventually degrades water quality because it gets into the waterway. So these are all issues that we feel like can be addressed through rulemaking, and I'll leave it open for a moment if anybody has any questions about our kind of proposed need. Oh, looks like I've got two hands. Let's see, Dave and Chris. I don't know who raised their hands first,
Dave
so go
did.
ahead. Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi there. I was just curious, in regards to the firearms discharge issues, have there been specific safety incidents, and were those related to legal hunting opportunities or simply general discharge of firearms on these lands?
My understanding is that it is based on general discharge, and that the incidences weren't related to legal hunting activities. But Chris, do you have any additional information on that? That's been how it's framed for me. I will admit that I came in late to this process, so there may be some information that I'm not aware of.
Now, I think that's probably correct, and we can look at the I was going to mention that this area is already been closed by Director Walker for an emergency. But when it comes to specific complaints or reports of a discharge of firearms, I didn't know if maybe Captain Asbo or anyone else from law enforcement might have some thoughts on that. But I could definitely, we should share at least with this group the emergency closure and the information that went into that, and then and I can talk a little more. Let's get to Dave's question though first. If anybody has it, or if Captain Asmo's not there, we will make sure you get the information that we have that led to the emergency closure. And I can probably find that during this meeting if we haven't already shared that with the RAC members. What I was just going to say, also adding on to what Blake was mentioning, is that this area is already closed by Director Walker for these two uses due to the importance of protecting health and safety and the resource out there. So they are closed on a temporary basis under the director's authorities to discharge of firearms and motor vehicles, with the exceptions that you see in the draft rule already. And we have limited the scope both in the emergency rule and in this proposed permanent rule to the lands below the I-84 bridge, the lower 2.5 miles of the Sandy River and its confluence with the Columbia River. Because frankly, we like to try to limit the scope of recreational restrictions when we can, and leave things open to all lawful recreational use. And we do already have a permanent restriction on overnight uses and open fires during a fire season under our administrative rule for the majority, I think all of the state-owned part of the Sandy River, which I believe goes from River Mile 0 to, I just had it up, roughly 37.5. And that is in our that already has a section of administrative rule. It's OAR 141-088-0035. And then this proposed rule, thanks to Danielle's already done our numbering for us, would be right next to this one at 0036. And that was all I was just going to add for now, and be happy to try to answer some more questions as we go through. Thank you.
Much appreciated for that context, Chris. Captain Asbo, do you have anything to speak about the discharge of firearms? Maybe some details about the incidents? If not, we will look in our records and provide that with RAC members to whatever we have.
Yeah, so I don't have the statistical data in front of me, so I can only speak to the anecdotal information I have, which is that we have responded to numerous complaints about negligent and uncontrolled discharge of firearms down there that are not related to any other legal recreational activity, i.e. hunting. And some of that discharge of firearms has been involved with, or been well engaged in other criminal activity. Again, I don't have the actual numbers right in front of me, so I'm only speaking as to what I'm personally aware of.
No, thank you, Captain Asbo. That's very, very helpful. Appreciate it. Danielle, can you head to the next slide, please?
Oh, we actually have a couple of questions.
My apologies. Ray, you've got your hand raised, and then we'll move to Jeff.
That sounds right.
Right. My only comment was what Captain Asbo said has been our experience also in the city of Troutdale, that anecdotally there have been negligent discharges out there. But to answer the direct question from ODFW, I don't believe any of them are related to legal licensed discharge by hunters in the pursuit of the appropriate season. So to answer that question directly. So if that's leading later on to a comment about maybe expanding the exceptions under number 2 of the rule to exclude licensed and lawfully in-season hunters, that would be a reasonable suggestion. So yeah, I think Captain Asbo is correct. It is the non-hunter who we're most concerned about out in Thousand Acres.
Yes. Thank you, Ray. Appreciate it. And good point about adding that into the rule language. That would be a really good, I guess, edit to make an appropriate one. So Jeff, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dave and Ray. I was going to ask about hunting because that is a legal use and that is permitted out there. So thanks for bringing that up. I assume there's going to be some discussion of enforcement because the other 2 items you discussed, overnight camping and fires, haven't been enforced either. And if you've got an emergency order in place, I'd be curious if you're going to talk in this presentation about enforcement.
Yeah, I did not have a space in the presentation to specifically address enforcement, but it would be a topic that would likely come up. We as a department are not an enforcement agency, so we rely on our partners, state police, local sheriff's department, city police to help us enforce our rules. So it would be a matter of what resources are available for those police units. Is that the police units? Police departments, enforcement departments, however you want to phrase it, but it would be what resources they have available to address these concerns.
Yeah, with regards to the emergency, thank you, Blake. With regards to the emergency closure restrictions, it's not a closure. We have already posted and reposted areas of the Delta at least a few times since the emergency closures were put into place. And I know I and other representatives from the department have been out with our primary law enforcement partners here, which is Multnomah County Sheriff's Office HOPE team, to educate and talk with folks out there about the closures in the Delta with regards to motor vehicles and discharge of firearms. I know the first time I was out there with one of the sergeants, there was one vehicle and it was unoccupied that we did leave some information on. And I don't, perhaps the Hope team has more information. I know I did not hear any discharge of firearms, or I didn't see vehicles out there the last time I went out to repost, but that would be our primary partner. And there is some language in here that helps with enforcement in the draft rule. That sub 3 is some proposed language that should help with enforcement if somebody does indeed violate those use restrictions. So that's the thought there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that is some kind of new proposed language. I don't believe we've used this language before in our previous restrictions, and it was specifically to address, concerns of enforcement and having repeat offenders. So I see, Jeff, you still have your hand raised. Do you have an additional question or?
I had an additional question. Yeah, as a
Perfect.
corollary to enforcement, access, because I understand people have accessed it through the tunnels underneath the freeway. Are there any infrastructure changes that are being planned so you can't get a vehicle in there?
I do not believe that we have plans to put any, my guess, like boulders or riprap or bollards or any kind of preventative measures like that. I would say in the past, when DSL has done that, they have proved to be fairly ineffective and have, at a cost to the department, and typically don't tend to curb that type of use because you can just drive around it or otherwise try to, circumvent those type of measures. So. Okay, Jeff, did that answer your question sufficiently?
Well, I think properly placed bollards would make it more difficult and go to alleviating, but that's an opinion, I guess. I think they should be considered. That's, to me, like I said, a corollary to enforcement, but it's okay.
All right, thank you for your comment, Jeff. Chris, you've got your hand up.
I was just going to say, no, thank you for that comment. And it's something we will definitely look into. We do have meetings with our partners out there and who include the adjacent landowners, whether it be ODOT or Oregon Parks and Rec Department. And of course, we have Stephen on here from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So will be something we can talk about is what those access points are. And certainly it also is good. Those are also good spots where those access points are to actually put our signage too for the different closures. So we will have discussions about what that looks like if and when we continue on with the rulemaking here. Thank you.
All right. Not seeing any other hands raised, I will move us forward to the rules discussion. Let's see, Danielle, do you mind putting up on the screen the actual rule language itself? Yeah, perfect. So as you can see, like our other restrictions, we start off with where is this property and describe what what lands are affected by this restrictions. So this is typical language that we use. So from high water to low water, we provide these restrictions. We don't typically, I don't think we have extended the restrictions into the channel just because there's, So any uplands or former islands are also affected. And this is from, River Mile 0 to 2.5. And it's intended to kind of address this smaller area that is the Sandy River Delta. excuse me. It also includes, the Columbia River Side Channel, and we typically try to also add in landmarks, because easily identifiable and identifiable and recognizable landmarks, so that enforcement can be a little bit easier, because we can point to, well, this is a known landmark that this restriction goes to. So I will just begin with, the restrictions include any and all use of motorized vehicles, including all-terrain vehicles. The intent is not to include watercraft, just to, in case anybody had any questions. Any and all discharge of firearms. I think this is an appropriate place maybe to capture that comment that Ray had, and others, that, other legal means may be appropriate. So if you're talking about hunting, legal hunting, and licensing of that way. I think Ray, or I'm not sure what the exact language was that was referenced, but I felt like it captured, that kind of exception. And perhaps I don't know, Danielle, do you have ideas of perhaps it's better suited to be in section 2, where we mentioned the exemptions specifically?
I think in section 2, and I've pulled up, we've done some recent rulemaking for similar use or for other use restrictions down in Lake County, where we did accept, we have an exception for hunters. And so I was just pulling up that language, where we have, it says hunters on foot in possession of valid controlled hunt tags. It's a little different there because of what is allowed to be hunted. So if we wanted to use something like that, where hunters on foot, which, clears up, like, hunter, even though you might be hunting, you still can't have a motorized vehicle. So let me type in some suggested language here.
And so while Danielle's doing that, are there any comments about the language for restricting motorized vehicles or the discharge of firearms outside of what we've already noted as other legal use of firearms? Any discussion from RAC members about that? Any other thoughts? Dave, thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, creating an exception for hunters, legally licensed hunters during the appropriate season, I think would be a great step forward, just because this rule does have the potential to impact our legal hunters. And I think too, this might have been what someone else was getting at with their question regarding law enforcement, but just because of the scope of the geographic area that this is affecting, if you don't accept hunters from this, it could cause some real issues with regulation and law enforcement by Oregon State Police, who regulate who conduct fish and wildlife law enforcement, simply because a very large portion of the area adjacent to the areas this rule would affect would still be open to waterfowl hunting. But yeah, thank you very much.
Chris, point of pleasure. Dave, I just wanted to maybe follow up. Are there other legal hunting needs in that area? Like, so waterfowl, you mentioned, are there other seasons that DSL maybe should have or be aware of?
There are not. The only legal hunting in that area is in our regulations as waterfowl hunting. So
great, thank you.
Waterfowl season is the only time that hunters should ever be out there, really.
That was my question. Thank you, Dave. That's great. I don't know. I mean, I'll let you're the RAC and you guys can talk about, if that's the legal hunting season, I might consider, I'll let you all consider how you want to frame an exception. If there's not a reason for somebody to be shooting a 270 Win Mag down there. You know, I'll leave it to you guys to think about it, but I'll be thinking about that too as
Yeah,
the agency.
no, that's really good food for thought there, Chris. And I wonder if there is a reference we can make in the language to that particular season.
Yes, so that's my next question, because, so pardon me, I'm not familiar with hunting and everything associated with it. So we can narrow this down to hunters on foot in possession of a specific license. That way it's clear for what season. So I don't know how that would be worded. So legal hunting fowl or fowl hunting licenses, I'm not sure how it's referred to.
It would be water fowl.
Waterfowl, yeah.
Dave, maybe you can maybe provide some language, but before that, I see that Jeff has his hand up, and I'd like to get to that before moving on.
Sorry, I have, you know, a lot of, so I believe, and Dave can clarify, it's also the type of firearm, shotgun, and no other types of firearms are the corollary to that waterfowl hunting. Is that correct? So maybe there's some language of the type of firearm too.
That's correct. The only legal firearm that you can use to hunt waterfowl is a shotgun.
And is that how you would refer to it in rule, Dave? Like if you're talking about that firearm, or is there another phrase that shotgun would that is the term that you would use for the firearm?
I believe shotgun would be the correct term.
Okay. I also am not a hunter, if that is painfully obvious or not. So, you know, much thanking for helping us out on that.
Does the license restrict the type of firearm?
The license does not restrict the type of firearm. Okay. Technically, there's not a waterfowl license. A general license allows you to hunt waterfowl as long as you have a waterfowl validation and some other necessary things. So I'm happy to work with you or put into the chat some suggested language that would clarify.
I think that would be really helpful, Dave, if you don't mind.
Yeah, a waterfowl certification?
Not quite a certification.
Or with the waterfowl?
I would say hunters on foot, or maybe something like waterfowl hunters on foot during legal waterfowl hunting seasons, or something similar to that.
Yeah, because that, and by defining the type of hunter, you would be precluding, you know, other types of firearms. Got it. All right, I appreciate it.
And you know, obviously we can chew on this some more, but it just, so they will be on foot when they are on the land that we have in subsection 1, but they'll likely be accessing it via boat, right? I'm guessing most of these hunters come in. Do most of these hunters walk in, or they just take boats into this area, Dave?
I would guess that's a mix of the two. It kind of depends on your budget.
Right.
I think many people walk in.
Got it.
Good to know. Thank you.
All right, and just to be clear, we will send a final draft, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong, Danielle, but once we make these corrections, we'll be sending out a final draft for RAC members to review.
Yes.
And actually, Danielle will probably go over that at the last slide, our next steps. So jumping the gun, not to keep using that reference. All right, so here we have some language for the exemptions. Danielle, can you move to section 3? We can maybe discuss that. So section 3, like we mentioned earlier, is just to kind of address some enforcement issues. So if criminal conduct is, you know, committed on state lands, as we've described in the above section, or, you know, violates another restriction that's in this rule, they could be prohibited from, using these lands, in the future. So the director would issue a written notice that explains the extent and the duration of that prohibition. And, because of that, because it's an agency decision, the person receiving notice would be allowed to request a hearing and appeal kind of that decision. So, like I said previously, I don't believe that we've used this language before. I could be mistaken because I haven't been a part of every Division 88 restriction, but the intent is to address repeat offenders and to provide a little bit, I guess, more. A little bit more for law enforcement agencies to kind of work with.
I think that's right, Blake. Yeah, we had a conversation leading up to the emergency restrictions about what enforcement would look like. And it was sort of pointed out that we sort of had a gap there about being able to expel people for a longer period of time. If somebody is caught breaking the restriction, we can have them cited for trespass. And we could cite them civilly for trespass if there's damage or there's civil penalty authority. But there was sort of this gap. Okay, well, does that mean can they just come back the next day? And the answer is yes. So this is actually kind of fresh language that depending on what this RAC thinks of it about it, and what if we get any input during public comment, et cetera, that we might go back and add to Division 88 as a whole under the general enforcement provisions. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris, for that explanation. Does anybody, would anybody like to, oh, thanks, Dave. Go right ahead.
Sorry, you might have been about to answer this, but who is the hearing, who's actually doing the hearing if they do try to appeal a prohibition?
Chris, you may know, but I think it would go through an administrative law judge.
That is an excellent question, and the way it's written, that'll be a good question to ask our counsel. The way it's written, it looks like it is set up for a contested case hearing, so
which I don't think we would.
Administrative law process.
Yeah,
but we should clarify that both to answer your question as a valued RAC member, but for everyone else's edification too.
Yeah, my guess is the intent would be to follow the administrative law process. And to have that decision go through there, but
that would be our standard. That's our standard process for someone who wants to challenge an agency decision. And obviously another avenue would be circuit court, but most administrative decisions from our agency do go through the administrative law process.
And so we may want to then change, instead of may request a hearing, may appeal the agency's decision or something like that.
Yeah, I would flag it for now that we'll discuss with counsel the appropriate language.
Yep.
Because we did consult we already consulted with DOJ on this, so let's see what they think as we bring up the concerns.
Got it. All right, any other discussion about Section 3? All right, seeing no hands raised, and I don't have any other points to make about it. Like our other restrictions, it's intended to be pretty straightforward language, so that it's easily enforceable. And so with that, unless there's no other hands raised, I'll end the discussion and pass it over to Danielle.
Oh, you're still going to be talking about the fiscal impact statement and racial equity.
Oh, good grief. That's right. Thank you. I got 2 other things to talk about. My apologies. So as a part of this rulemaking process, we did, a fiscal impact statement, and let me pull that up. Danielle, oh, thank you. Great fiscal impact statement. So we went through and thought about, well, what are the costs associated with this to agencies, to small businesses, and to other members of the broader public. What we were able to identify were some added expense to the department for noticing, monitoring, providing signage, going through the rulemaking and advisory, or going through the rulemaking process itself, and then some added expense also, as well as for enforcement, for responding to complaints, passing things along to our law enforcement partners. And we are proposing this draft with the support of the State Land Board. We also identified costs likely to Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, right, for enforcement as our partner in this. They would likely see increased costs of monitoring, reporting, enforcement, as violations of this rule would occur. They would be the ones that would best suited to respond. They've obviously been contacted, as can be seen with Captain Asbo's participation here, and we have their support, is my understanding. I don't want to speak for you for the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office now that they're in the room. So if that's different, Captain Asbo, let me know. And then the U.S. Forest Service, they would also see increased costs for monitoring and coordinating any issues that would affect both state and federal property. They have been consulted and are also in support of the draft rule. Any questions or comments about that cost of compliance section? All right, seeing none, do you mind, Danielle? Thank you. So for effects on small businesses, really what we've seen is, small businesses that would be affected are the small businesses that use this particular part of state property. And, it's really difficult for us to kind of calculate or analyze like what small businesses are currently using or operating on these state lands. It's our understanding that there really are not any small businesses conducting operations outside of maybe a guide, a fishing guide, hunting guide, recreational guide, and the intent is not to restrict those lawful uses, right? So we don't see this as posing an added cost to those businesses, and we don't know of any state authorizations that would be affected by this in this area. So leaseholds or commercial operations. We're not anticipating that the rulemaking, if adopted, right, will increase costs for reporting or record keeping, in addition, or rather, other administrative activities that are conducted by small businesses. And I think, yeah, I knew there was one more. And as well as we don't expect, professional service costs to increase, equipment, supplies, labor, or other costs to small businesses for complying with the proposed rulemaking. So any comments or discussion for the fiscal impact statement?
And I would just note, Blake, that we do have the exceptions process. Sub 2 talks about exceptions. So if somebody did or wanted to film a commercial out there or what have you, that they could get permission to drive their vehicle to a spot to do that, and they would get that could be considered department authorized persons if they they just have to get some sort of authorization, short-term access authorization from us or something like that.
Yeah, good point, Chris. I think technically it'd be a special use license because commercial movie would be covered under Division 125. But yeah, it easily would be, or rather the department would easily be able to allow that kind of use and to condition the authorization in such a way that, you know, any concerns, for example, if it was during the summer, perhaps we have a condition in the license that would require, you know, water to be used so that the ground is wetted, so any vehicles don't pose a risk to wildfire. But not to get too far into the weeds, but we would still be allowed to, you know, authorize uses and condition them in such a way that they wouldn't pose a risk, or would not pose additional risk. So. All right, well, with that, let's move on to the racial equity statement. All right, thank you, Danielle. So this is a part of the rulemaking advisory or rulemaking process that we evaluate, you know, who these proposed rulemakings will impact, how the rules may impact some groups of people differently than others. And, you know, this part of the process is essential in making sure that the department, you know, is equitable to all parties that use our public lands. So what we typically do is ask a series of questions from our RAC members and provide an opportunity for this type of discussion to make sure that we don't exclude or, you know, create rules that might unknowingly affect some groups more than others. So I'll begin with what persons and groups are subject to the rule. You know, all Oregonians are subject to these rules indiscriminately. There's not a specific group that is singled out separate from others. That said, I'd love to, you know, if there's any other points of discussion for that question, you know, happy to hear it out and others' opinions. All right, seeing no hands raised. What issues the rule is seeking to address and which racial groups are likely to be affected by those issues? You know, the issues that we're addressing are nuisance and, you know, otherwise unlawful uses of state lands and are not intended to, as I said before, you know, single out any racial groups or any minority or other interest groups, you know, separately. Any discussion or questions about who may be affected by or rather what issues the department is seeking to address? And lastly, ultimately, what impacts may this rule have on racial equity? You know, as I mentioned, it's the department feels that it is unlikely that this will impact any racial equity in Oregon. And then those who are subject, you know, to the rules, as I said, are all Oregonians, regardless of you know, what you identify or what your racial makeup is. Recreational enthusiasts and people experiencing unsheltered houselessness will be most often subject to those restrictions. That said, that you know, they are not you know, being singled out or in, you know, in particular. It is, you know, the activity that we are trying to prevent. So any comments, discussion about the racial equity and impact statement? All right, seeing no hands raised, I believe that would end our discussion of the draft rulemaking. I appreciate your participation and willingness to provide comment. And I'll hand it over to Danielle and she can talk about interested party comments.
Oh, yep. Sorry, I'm sharing the wrong thing. So if there's any interested parties on the line who would like to provide any other information or feedback on these rules, we'll welcome that now. Okay, not seeing any other comments. I'll go ahead and talk about the next steps for rulemaking. So at this point, we're looking to have our public comment period for the month of November, with our public rule hearing to be held as a hybrid public rule hearing around November 15th in the city of Troutdale is where we would have the in-person portion of it. So that way, folks who, local folks who are more likely to be affected by the rule have access to come talk to us, but we'll also have an online option for that. And we will send out the notice of the public comment period and the public rule hearing to all members of the RAC, in addition to our rulemaking listserv. So you will be informed about it. And we plan to present the proposed rule language and everything to, along with comments to the State Land Board in February, and then file it with the Secretary of State for adoption in February. And Jeff, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I would correct the year on those.
Oh,
It would be February 2024.
Thank you. Thank you. My brain
You're
didn't work that
welcome.
far in advance. I appreciate that. I'll fix that and I had a couple people look at this too.
Oh, that's so funny. I didn't even catch it either. I
Yeah.
looked at it and I was like, yep, looks right to me.
I appreciate any and all feedback on stuff like this. So February 2024 is when we'll be presenting it to the State Land Board and file with the Secretary of State. I'll make those corrections before I post this online and send it out to everyone. Dave, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, is the emergency rule to this effect in place until this goes before the board and becomes finalized?
So just a technical point of correction is there's not an emergency rule in place. It's an emergency restriction, which doesn't have a time frame on it. An emergency rule would just be 180 days. So we are allowed by our rules to issue an emergency restriction until we can put a permanent rule in place. So the restrictions will continue through when this rule becomes effective. Yes, Dave. You just muted yourself there. Go.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, does that mean that currently for the waterfowl hunting season that starts in 12 days, there is not an exception for waterfowl hunters out at Sandy River Delta?
Yes, there's.
I would say that's correct.
Yeah.
I think that's correct right now. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that something, Chris? Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, Dave, to talk over you. I think that might be something that we could address, but Chris, I'm not sure.
We can certainly talk about it. Yeah, but I think your interpretation is right. Right now, there's not a carve out. I don't see there being a carve out for it at this moment in time.
Yeah, the proposed language that we brought to you today is based on the language in the emergency restriction. Yes, Captain Asbo.
Also, I think as we discussed that, we should keep in mind that this is not for the entirety of the Sandy River Delta, which much of that is managed by U.S. Forest Service. It's only for the smaller portion that is managed by Department of State Lands. So when you look at it from the hunting perspective, it's not all of Sandy River Delta, but just that piece of shoreline that's DSL.
Yes, that's correct. It's just, so the closure, the area that's affected by this rule and that we put forth in the rule language is also, that's the same area of land that's in the emergency restrictions right now. Do we have any other questions or comments at this time? Yes, Chris.
Well, I wanted to take the temperature right now, as I think probably was communicated to you when we asked you to participate on the RAC with regards to expectations. We were planning on just having the one RAC meeting. We have a couple of tweaks to make and get back to you via email. Both clarifying what does a hearing look like in sub 3 that we are, which we need to know anyway. So that was a great, thank you for that feedback. And also the language that Danielle drafted to add exceptions in sub 2. And I just wanted to make sure you all were comfortable with us doing, getting that to you electronically via email, or did anyone have a burning need to have a second RAC meeting? I wanted to make sure that we heard that as well. So thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chris. Just want to say, if anybody has any objections to that language we added, we did talk about, we didn't really have any objections at that time. So what we'll do is we'll send out this language. And if you have any other feedback to give us, we'll welcome that. And we'll send that out to anything that is sent from one RAC member to the department. If there's a question or a comment, we'll send that out to the rest of the RAC members, just for, make sure, because it is a public process and we want all the RAC members to be involved. So yeah, so if after the meeting you have anything that you want to add, let us know. And if it's major, we will discuss possibly having a second RAC meeting. But at this point, we're only, like Chris said, looking at having just this one RAC meeting. All right. Well, at this time, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and participation for the RAC and taking the time out of your schedule and working with us. Oh, Jeff, you have a comment?
Yeah, kind of an extension to this. I don't want to belabor this, but I can almost guarantee you, when it comes to public comment, people are going to be asking about the more global problem. From reading the documents that were sent, this seems to be a first step in dealing with the camp situation long term. Are there plans to continue this work beyond this vehicle and firearm? Because you will get a lot of comments about that when this goes public.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. As to touch on what Chris said earlier, is we do have a permanent rule already in place that restricts overnight use and fires from River Mile 0 to, I believe it was 37.5.
Yep.
So we do have those use restrictions in place. And so that is something we already have in place. But I appreciate you letting us know that there might be comments about it.
That's correct, Danielle. So we don't have plans to change that rule. I think maybe Jeff was talking about enforcement of the existing rule a little bit. We are still talking with our partners who are they're all on this, all on the RAC today. Metro, Multnomah County Sheriff's Hope Team, and of course the adjacent our partners, federal partners at U.S. Forest Service. I always want to say Fish and Wildlife Service because we work with them up in Astoria area in the islands, but it's Forest Service here on what things look like in the Delta long term. If you watch the August Land Board meeting, where the Land Board initiated this rulemaking effort, we did have some possible good news that Captain Asbo came and testified to the Land Board, and it looks like there might be additional money for housing out in East County, and I know that's something that the group is looking at and working towards accomplishing. So more to come, I would say, in the Delta and the lands that are already subject to the permanent closures. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you for your time that you've taken out of your schedules to help us with this permanent rulemaking and providing feedback. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions, just let us know, send us an email, and we'll, get back to you as soon as we can. And hopefully we will have, by this time next week, have sent you out the summary, an answer to the question about the hearing and the changes to the draft rule language, and the presentation. So we're shooting for having that back to y'all within a week, but no guarantees, depending on the question we have to provide. We have to ask DOJ. Hopefully they'll get back to us quickly about the hearing process. So yeah. All right, thank you, and have a great day. And that concludes our meeting.
Thanks, everyone.